Hi, hello. Today's video is going to be a little on the longer side, so bear with me as we run through all this. I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it, Trump's a fascist, but don't just take my word for it. I'll prove it to you. It's not even very hard. For today's intellectual exercise, we're going to be using Umberto Eco's 14 characteristics of fascism that he wrote about in his 1995 essay, Fascism. The first of these is the cult of tradition. All great truths have already been revealed. There is an inherent value in maintaining the traditions of our forebears for no other reason than that they are the traditions of our forebears. This characteristic also often harkens back to a mythical golden age in which everything was better for entirely unexplained reasons. And Trump manifests this perfectly with his slogan of "Make America Great Again." The second of these characteristics is a rejection of modernism. Now, this doesn't mean a rejection of modern technologies, because in fact many fascist regimes pride themselves on the strength of their industry. Eco describes it as a rejection of the development of Western culture since the Enlightenment, which many fascists see as a constant descent into depravity. Now, that type of language, depravity, deviance, perversion, a corruption of good traditional societal values and norms, is exactly how Trump and his administration are talking about trans people specifically and the LGBTQIA+ community in general. The third characteristic is the cult of action for action's sake, which ties very heavily with fascism's reliance on anti-intellectualism. This third characteristic also ties in with fascism's reliance on anti-intellectualism, as it asserts that there's an inherent value in taking action merely for the sake of it without critical or rational thought behind those actions, which is exactly what Trump encouraged his supporters to do on January 6, 2021, when he told them to show up in the Capitol to try and overturn a lawful election. He told them, "Don't think, act for my sake and your sake and the sake of protecting our country. And if there are consequences for your actions, I will protect you from them." And then he did this by pardoning all of them. The fourth characteristic is disagreement is treason. Fascists don't want an open discourse. They don't want a marketplace of ideas. They don't want people to voice opinions critical of the regime. And if you do, well, we're seeing what happens when you do right now, with foreign students here on visas being abducted by the Department of Homeland Security, just for voicing opinions that the current administration doesn't like. The fifth characteristic is a fear of differences. Racism, xenophobia, transphobia, anyone who falls outside of the strict definition of who is considered a good, proper citizen of the state is a pariah and must be dealt with. Which is exactly what Trump is doing when he is attacking the trans community, the disabled community, and the undocumented immigrant community every single day. The sixth characteristic is to appeal to a frustrated middle class and try and turn them against the lower classes. Fascists seek to turn the proletariat against each other by stating that the problems that we're having in our society come from these useless eaters, these drains on society, these people living on welfare and dragging our country down, which is an aspect of fascism that Republicans have always employed when attacking people on welfare and other government benefits. The seventh characteristic is an obsession with a plot. There are elements inside the nation that are disloyal, that are seeking to sabotage it from the inside, destroy our nation and our way of life. And this is exactly the type of rhetoric that Trump uses against undocumented immigrants. The eighth characteristic is the classic fascist dichotomy that the enemy is both superhumanly strong and subhumanly weak, right? Trans women are somehow both too strong to compete in women's sports, but also too weak to be in the military. And these two perfectly contradictory ideas somehow make them a threat to good, regular Americans. The ninth characteristic Eco describes as pacifism is seen as trafficking with the enemy, because fascists believe that life is perpetual war. One of the ways that fascists gain power and maintain their power is by ensuring that there is always an enemy for their people to fight against, whether it is an internal one or an external one. There always has to be an enemy, and if you're not willing to fight against them, you are a traitor to the state. Right, Trump's doing this right now. Not only is he trying to pick a fight with goddamn everyone on the planet, but if you don't support the people he supports, like Israel, then you are a bad person and an enemy of the United States and its interests. The 10th characteristic is contempt for the weak. There's this inherent idea that all members of the society are inherently superior to outsiders simply because they are members of the society. This idea of contempt for the weak also holds within the society itself, where the rulers have an inherent contempt for the people that they rule over who were unable to seize power for themselves. This contempt for the weak can very clearly be seen in Elon Musk referring to people who need government assistance as members of the parasite class. Eco describes the 11th characteristic as, everyone is educated to be a hero. Fascist regimes have an obsession with guns and war, and fascist dictators regularly encourage their constituents to fight and die for the preservation of the nation, to give their lives for the glory of our great cause. Fascist regimes often embrace a cult of death where dying for the benefit of the state is seen as an inherently good thing. Trump has stated in the past and in private that he wants generals like Hitler had, ones who are perfectly loyal to him and are willing to follow every single one of his orders without question. Eco calls the 12th characteristic of fascism machismo and describes it as taking that obsession with guns and war and fighting and death and dragging it from a national down to an interpersonal level. But what that means in layman's terms is that toxic masculinity is an inherent facet of fascism. Right, this idea that men need to be big, tough, manly men who don't cry and love punching things with their fists, and that women are weak and subservient, and that being gay is weird and we don't like that kind of stuff. It's just a huge part of fascism. The 13th characteristic of fascism is selective populism. The people are viewed as a monolith, as having a singular collective will that only the fascist leader is empowered to interpret, i.e., dictate to the people what their will is and what they want and need. Which is exactly what Trump's doing by trying to bypass the separation of powers and the checks and balances of the legislative and judicial branch by trying to rule purely through executive orders. And our 14th characteristic of fascism once again circles back around to anti-intellectualism. Eco called it newspeak. Fascists rely on and encourage an impoverished vocabulary to limit critical thinking skills in the people. And you only need to listen to even one of Trump's speeches to see that newspeak, to hear that impoverished vocabulary, and to understand that he is entirely unable to make a single coherent or cogent point about any topic that he's ever spoken on ever in his entire life. But influence, like shit, flows down the mountain. So because Trump is in a position of authority and because he presents himself that way, it's seen as virtuous by his constituents that he is the way that he is. Anyway, that's all 14 characteristics of fascism. Trump hits every single one of them. So there you have it. Have a day.